Okay, so before we go further in this, the next thing I want to talk about is fate, which is a big theme in all film noirs, and particularly in this one. They return again and again to the idea of fate. Um, Fate is like what is destined to happen. It has to happen. If you've ever seen a movie that has witches that tell the future, it's your destiny, it's your fate. There's no way to change it. A lot of time travel movies have a kind of fate theme where the character thinks that they can change time and fix it, but it often ends up they can't fix it because it was always destined to be this way. Um, it's an old idea. I mean, it's something that goes. I mean, if you took Shakespeare class with me, Macbeth and the witches is very much about this idea of fate. The witches sort of predict what Macbeth is going to do. Macbeth, by the way, like Double Indemnity, is very much about murderers. A sort of husband and wife or lovers who commit murder together and then fall to fucking pieces and get destroyed. So fate is like the unstoppable thing that you can't stop from happening. Um, but there is something really important, I think, that you need to learn to sort of think about this. There is a difference between tragedy and doom. It is a difference that has gotten lost a little bit. Most people could not tell you the difference between tragedy and doom. It's a really important thing to know for stories and films and things. So let's talk about that real quick. Doom is when something happens to you and it's destroying you, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So it sounds a little bit like fate. It overlaps a bit. I mean, sort of, but doom. When you think of doom, a doom is when a volcano explodes and kills you. Doom is when a dragon eats you, and there's nothing you can do about it because you're just a regular person. You don't have any superpowers. Doom is a meteor, a lightning bolt is doom. Um, Tragedy, though, is supposed, and really, tragedy is the one that's more connected to fate. Tragedy is not, there's supposed to be a difference between tragedy and doom. In tragedy, you also, like in Doom, you die, in tragedy, you also die. But in tragedy, the idea is that it's sort of your fault when you die in tragedy. Because of, not because of what you did a little bit. Maybe you made the wrong choices. But it's not like, tragedy is never bad luck. Tragedy is supposed to be um, because of who you are. It's what kind of person you are. So in Shakespeare, for example, Romeo and Juliet love each other so intensely. Actually, Romeo and Juliet's a really bad example. Let me pick something else. Macbeth in Shakespeare, he wants that crown and he can't stop himself. Lady Macbeth can't stop herself. They want these things. And when he starts to falter, she talks him back into it. But it's who they are. In Hamlet, so Hamlet, for example, is a story of a guy who's told to get revenge. His ghost dad shows up and says, your uncle murdered me. Get revenge." Hamlet is the wrong guy for this job. He's not. He's a lover, not a fighter. He's a thinker. He's a philosopher, not a action hero. So because of who he is, disaster strikes. Because he's just incapable of being the kind of person the story needs. So there's something. But tragedy is inevitable because you are who you are, and even though you're like, oh, well, there's lots of choices, but I'm sure you've experienced people be like, you don't have to do this, and you're like, yes, I do, because of who you are, because of your principles, because of the kind of person you are. So this is a story. The story about fate. There's something rotten in Neff, and there's something rotten in Barbara Stanwyck. And she brings it out in him. He seems okay to begin with, not great, because he wants to have sort of sex with a married woman just right from the get go, and he's pursuing her even though he knows she's married. So that's not the best. But she clearly is like the kind of person. There's something rotten inside of her, and she can't really escape from it. Yeah. So I'll do a little sidebar here and say that I saw the movie Hereditary, which everyone loved, and I did not love. I thought the movie was technically great in the sense that the music is great, the editing is great. I was really scared. The acting is phenomenal. It's really neat. But it turns out to be an example of doom rather than tragedy. I thought it was about decisions the characters were making. It was causing everything to go wrong. But in the end, it turns out that a witch made them do that shit. And they weren't in control. So if they're not in control, then it's doom. Doom is not an interesting story. Doom is just something happened to you. Okay, tragedy is supposed to be, it's coming from in here. Jack wants to kill his whole family. That's why it's tragic, because it's who he is that leads him down this path. It's not just like he went in the wrong room and people started fucking with him. He was thinking about killing his family before. The hotel just helped him do what he wanted to do anyway. That's tragedy. And in the Stephen King book, it's because he's an alcoholic, which is also a big part of it. Um, so what is fate in this movie? So fate is that inevitable thing. It has to happen. In ancient Greek plays and in Shakespeare, they talk about fate. They talk about the gods and the goddesses and the, who are controlling your destiny, and Zeus and all of these things. Double Indemnity talks about fate a lot. But interestingly, they have a modern day image of what fate is. More than one character brings it up. But it's the trolley car. It's the train. And that is the movie's metaphor for fate. Why? Because there's a track. And all the train can do is follow the track. If you're a train conductor, you can't be like, oh shit, you know what? I'm going to make a right turn here. That's not how trains work. They have to follow the track. And so Keyes mentions that murder is like a trolley car, and you have to ride it all the way to the end. And at the end, there's a graveyard, and that if you committed murder together, you got to ride the trolley together, and you're stuck with each other. You can't get away from each other in the little trolley car. And that's a metaphor Keyes is using to describe fate. He's, in the old days, they would talk about fate being like, the gods and the goddesses and the thread of your life that the gods cut off or whatever, or the destiny. But like in this movie, it's not from the gods or goddesses. The image is mechanical. It's a mechanism. It's a train or a trolley car. That's why it's really interesting that the murder is committed on a train. Because Keyes makes this whole metaphor for a trolley, which again, like something like a mini train that follows along a track. Keyes makes this metaphor with the trolley, but it's important to note that the murder itself in the movie is on a train. So the image that Keyes is talking about is shown multiple times in the movie in the form of the train. Because the trolley car is just how he's talking. But the train is the actual image of inevitable whatever, because it can't turn. It has to go all the way down that road, and it comes up again and again and again. So one of the interesting things about Double Indemnity is it's like an ancient Greek tragedy or like a Shakespeare tragedy. But it's been modernized. And so it's interesting to see ideas that were working in ancient Greece in plays like Antigone and Oedipus, and images in Shakespeare, in like The Witches of Macbeth, for example, show up here, but they're no longer gods and goddesses and witches and creatures. It's a machine. It's a train. It's a trolley is the image of, wait, the city's being really loud. It's the trolley as the image. So it's an important updating of the images. But the crucial thing, especially for your papers, is to notice that it's the same idea of unstoppable fate, but that the images and metaphors for unstoppable fate are different, because here they are trains and trolleys. Okay, cool. We're doing good. There is a larger, bigger thing that this sort of plays into. Another thing about fate. Inevitable. Can't turn it around. Neff is narrating the whole movie, right? That he goes into the office and he pulls out the recorder and he starts recording. I know it's hard to tell what that is, but that's what it looked like to record things in the old days. It's like a cylinder and they have a little big microphone, but it looks like like a funnel. He records the whole thing. That's another thing that makes it inevitable, is the story. He's telling you the story of what happened to him, but it already happened. There's no way to change it. If you're watching a movie, you can hope the character makes a different decision and saves the day. But here, he's not going to save the day, because he tells you right at the beginning. But that's something that gives the whole story this feeling of fate and tragedy, which is that it's already, by the time you start watching it, it's already over. So you might be like, oh, I hope Phyllis and Neff get together and live happily ever after. You already know that they do not. You see the same thing in Romeo and Juliet, when the opening lines of Romeo and Juliet, two houses, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge break to new mutiny, where blood makes civil hands unclean. From forth the fatal loins of these two foes, a pair of star-crossed lovers take their life. Right? They just tell you right at the beginning, Romeo and Juliet are going to kill themselves. So that is the key image of fate, is the idea of it being narrated by a dead man. Sunset Boulevard, which we'll watch later this semester, also narrated by a dead man. American Beauty, also narrated by a dead man. 14 Reasons Why? Is that narrated by a dead person? I don't know. There could be a paper there. See you in the next video.